Oh, come on, man.
I don't like him. I don't like that offense.
Oh, 100%.
I like Kirk Cousins. I'll fight everyone on this.
He's one of these guys that I'm a big believer in.
Who would we have ranked higher right now?
Are you serious? You don't actually believe that.
Welcome into the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. My name is Kyle Yates, and I am your host. I am joined by the terrible Mike Tagliere. I called you the great Mike Tagliere on the last podcast, so I got to balance it out, I guess. But you can find both of us on Twitter at KyleYNFL and at Mike Tagliere NFL. Tags, how's it going?
It's terrible, actually. 2020 just keeps getting worse. And as you pointed out in our Slack chat just a moment ago, Kanye West is apparently running for president or something like that. I don't know. It's a terrible year. Let's just say that.
The blurb, I just put it out on Twitter. The blurb from that section, could have been written by The Onion. No joke. It looks like it is completely satirical, and I'm not sure if it is or not.
That's 2020 for you.
It's 2020. I mean, legitimately, he announced that the other day, and I was like, yeah, sounds about right. I wasn't surprised at all. But anyway, I think we could talk about that forever, but that's not what people are tuning in for. We are joined today by Davis Mattek from SportsGrid and host of the Take Cast. He can be found on Twitter at Davis Mattek. Davis, thanks for joining us today, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Very, very excited to chat some football.
Absolutely. Well, guys, before we start the show, I just wanted to tell you about a new show we released on Wednesday called the Daily Juice Podcast. Every day, all year round, Betting Pros host Matt Perrault will spend 15 minutes sharing his insight and picks on each day's most notable bets across all sports. This includes NASCAR, UFC, MLB, NBA, NHL, and of course, the NFL. The Daily Juice Podcast is now available on all major podcast platforms, and you can also listen to it at bettingpros.com/dailyjuice. I also wanted to let you know that we're running our first live stream mock draft for this season on Tuesday, July 14th at 1 p.m. Eastern over at our YouTube channel, which you can find at youtube.com/fantasypros. Best of all, you have a chance to take part in the draft, and if you beat Tags, you'll win a free 6-month Fantasy Pros premium subscription. Entering will only take a few seconds. All you have to do is subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/fantasypros and fill out a really short form at fantasypros.com/mock. We will be selecting participants for this mock draft by Friday, July 10th. So please get your entries in as soon as possible. Head over to fantasypros.com/mock for more details. All right, guys, let's get into the discussion for today. We are talking about players who are undervalued or flying under the radar right now that we think have a chance to make a huge impact in 2020. So we haven't talked to each other about these players, so I'm sure there's going to be some overlap, but let's get right to it. We'll try to get through as many names as we can. Tags, we'll do this in a roundtable format. So you are up first, and then Davis, and then I will go.
I'm going to start with a softball because I'm going to try and work as the later rounds as we move on. But I want to talk about just for a moment about Juju Smith-Schuster and that he's an undervalued stud in terms of, if we were to go through the season, let's say that Ben Roethlisberger comes back to a quarterback, 90% of the quarterback that he was prior to his injury. He was supporting 2 top 12 wide receivers every year. Juju Smith-Schuster was extremely young, growing into his role. Last year was a down year. We'll be honest about it. But James Washington, he's being replaced by Chase Claypool. We have Deante Johnson on the other side of the field playing on the perimeter, going to see the top-tier cornerbacks. And they've already said that Juju's going to go back into the slot, which was where he was most successful when Antonio Brown was on the team. Now, again, I'm not saying that Deante Johnson's going to get the attention that AB did, but at the same time, it's really difficult to scheme against a slot wide receiver like Juju Smith-Schuster. So, he's one of those guys where I don't think that anyone would blink if he finished as a top 5 wide receiver this year. Again, there are some question marks around Ben Roethlisberger and the offense in general, but at the same time, again, Yates, I wanted to ask you because I know you were against Juju Smith-Schuster in terms of where I had him ranked, but would you be shocked if you saw him finish as a top 5 wide receiver this year?
No, not at all. And I've started to come around to him as the offseason has gone along, where I've been looking at his situation where he's coming into, this season, moving back into the slot. Everything that you laid out is kind of paving a path for him to move back into top-tier fantasy relevance. So I definitely understand it. I get the love for Juju. I have him at wide receiver 11 right now in my rankings, so I'm right around there. But, we're talking about these guys that are within the top 12, top 15 even. There's a definite path for them to finish in the top 5. So depending on where he ends up in, when we get to the off season, or when we get to draft season, right, when people are early September, people are drafting Juju. Are they going to be drafting him as a top 5 wide receiver? Is his ADP going to creep all the way up there? Then at that point, I might be out, but otherwise, I think he's a value right now.
Yeah, Davis, where are you at on Juju? Because we had a debate. Yates and I went back and forth on an email. Are you giving up on him in this offense? Do you think the defense has gotten too good to where the pass attempts are going to fall off? Are you worried about Ben?
No, I'm not. I'm not particularly worried. I mean, I think the issue you have to have with drafting both Juju Smith-Schuster, James Conner, and Deante Johnson, it's pretty much all related to Ben Roethlisberger's arm. If Ben Roethlisberger's arm stays healthy, then I think that he is, I think it's incredibly likely that Smith-Schuster is going to end up being, one of the 5 best wide receivers in fantasy. And if Big Ben gets hurt and we are getting a season out of, really the worst backup quarterback situation in all of football with Mason Rudolph and Devlin Hodges, I think he will end up being, one of the worst draft picks. And I really think it's about that simple, because if you go back and you look at what Juju Smith-Schuster had done through 2 seasons, his historic comps were basically like Randy Moss and Josh Gordon, and those were the only guys who had performed as well as he had it at such a young age. So I am in on thinking that Smith-Schuster is a value in drafts this year.
Nice.
All right, well, Davis, let's just turn right back around to you here, and let's get your first guy for undervalued studs.
So very similar, in a very similar draft range, we have DJ Moore, who goes as, he goes in that kind of round 4 range. Sometimes he will go round 3, but I have him as one of my 6 best fantasy wide receivers. I have him as a 2nd round pick in PPR leagues. He was wide receiver 6 on a points per game basis with Kyle Allen last year before he got injured in week 15. And I basically think that DJ Moore's ceiling is, with, competent quarterback play, is like number 1 overall wide receiver, wide receiver performances. And, I think the market kind of views him as definitely like worse than Julio Jones, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. And I think he should be valued in that tier.
So I want to ask you, based off of that, is that projection, you talk about him potentially finishing as the number 1 overall wide receiver, right? Is that on the back of just pure target volume, or are you basing it on the back of, this offense is going to be dynamic, there are going to be touchdowns all over the board? Where are you kind of landing with that?
So it's a combination of both. This offense just has they have 4 really good players, right? They have DJ Moore, they have Christian McCaffrey, they have Curtis Samuel, they have Robbie Anderson. Maybe we are putting Ian Thomas in there, maybe we aren't, but they have had a super narrow passing tree. Obviously, I'm expecting Teddy Bridgewater to be a lot better of a player than Kyle Allen was. I think Kyle Allen basically proved himself to be one of the worst starting quarterbacks, that we've seen in the NFL in quite some time. And he runs the sort of routes and plays the kind of position that is just very conducive to racking up a lot of targets and racking up, a high catch rate. He's like basically the best wide receiver in the NFL at running slants and at turning slant targets, because he's so good after the catch as well. He's able to add yards after the catch and touchdown upside on some of those really basic slant routes. So I am very in on DJ Moore, both his volume and his efficiency.
Sure. All right. Well, Tags, what do you think? Where are you at with DJ Moore this season?
I definitely see the attraction here. He saw a lot of volume last year. My concern is obviously under Matt Rule, we'd have no idea what these roles are going to look like. Going to get Robbie Anderson is concerning just because Robbie Anderson comes from the offense they played together. He's already played under Matt Rule. Teddy Bridgewater, when he was the starter for New Orleans, he kind of locked onto one wide receiver, and I don't know if they're trying to build around Robbie Anderson. They shouldn't. DJ Moore is a fantastic wide receiver, so this has nothing to do with him. It just has more to do with all these targets, because you have to figure Christian McCaffrey's not going to lose. He's getting 100 targets. That's happening. And then you say they signed Robbie Anderson to this 2-year deal. They clearly like him. They didn't trade Curtis Samuel, but we did hear rumors about it. They have to figure out a way to get creative with him, even though he was one of the least efficient wide receivers in football last year. I understand his targets were bad, but so were DJ Moore's, and DJ Moore did just fine. So I like DJ Moore quite a bit. I think I prefer him as like a high-end wide receiver too, but does he have the upside to get there? Yeah, he's a receiver that can get 140 targets if they treat him as that true number 1 receiver. Again, there's some risk in it, and I think that's why he's not going as a top 12 wide receiver. He actually might be. In Dynasty, I was shocked to see that DJ Moore is like the number 5 wide receiver, number 6 wide receiver.
Yeah.
It was high for my taste, but in redraft, he seems to be priced about right.
Yeah, this offseason, his Dynasty ADP was skyrocketing. Yeah. So, it doesn't surprise me to hear that he was within the top 5. All right, I'm going to go here and I'm going to bring up Jarvis Landry. This is just a guy who is perennially just undervalued in the fantasy community, but yet he consistently produces. I mean, I brought this up on the other podcast this week where Jarvis Landry in 2017 was the wide receiver 7, 2018 wide receiver 19, 2019 wide receiver 13. Like, he's done nothing but just produce for fantasy football over the past few years. If you're looking at this offense, I think what is pushing his ADP down, like, guys, his ADP right now is wide receiver 31. So he's being consistently just pushed further and further down draft boards. And I think it potentially is this offense, right? We're talking about low passing volume, but it's really a two-headed monster at the wide receiver position. It's Odell and it's Jarvis. Outside of that, Rashard Higgins, Donovan Peoples-Jones, they're not going to be getting on the field with how predominantly run-heavy and 12 personnel based this offense is going to be. Yeah. So, and we've seen in Minnesota, Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs have been very, very fantasy relevant over the past few seasons. It does not make sense to me why he's so low in ADP, and his ECR is wide receiver 29 as well. I have him at wide receiver 23. So it's not like I'm saying that he's a top 15 wide receiver or anything like that. But when we're talking about someone who is undervalued, I believe that Jarvis Landry has the potential, because he's done it consistently, to finish within the top 20.
Yeah, Landry, he's like that guy that nobody ever wants to draft because he's like boring in a way. He is consistently boring, but he's consistently reliable. The question is, does the hip surgery that he had this offseason, does that make us worry a little bit?
Yeah, Davis, where are you at with Landry? And, does, like Tags mentioned, does that hip surgery potentially scare you at all from taking him? Again, he's going pretty late. I mean, Scott Fishbowl, we're all participating in, he went in the 6th or 7th round in some leagues that I've been seeing. So where are you at with Jarvis Landry this year?
Yeah, I really like Jarvis Landry. I think that, there certainly is a chance that Odell Beckham's, just continued injuries might have, kind of caught up with him, basically thinking that, like, actually it's going to be Landry who kind of takes the onus as the number 1 wide receiver this year. Also would not surprise me if one of the things that Kevin Stefanski is thinking to quell a lot of the issues that the Cleveland Browns had last offseason is just like, we got to dial up a lot of easy throws for Baker. We need to be doing a lot of play action. We need to be using a lot of screens, a lot of slants, just kind of to get him in rhythm and to pick up free yards for this offense. And Landry is going to be the clear beneficiary of that as opposed to Odell. And you know what? I mean, to be honest, Landry has been better than Odell in their Cleveland career anyway. So I'm on board with this for sure.
Awesome. All right, well, Tags, you're up here. Who do you have?
All right, I'm going to move down the board a little bit. And this player is going, I think, around the wide receiver 25 range. DK Metcalf. He's one of those guys that I talk about. If you want to shoot for this guy and you want to aim for a guy that could finish top 10 as a top 10 wide receiver, but it's being drafted as a wide receiver 3, Metcalf's your guy. I mean, this Seattle team, Bobby and I are going through a debate right now on Tyler Lockett. I actually think Lockett is valuable too. But if you want to project someone that you can get later in drafts, just go to Metcalf, because you look at the defense, this team, like the shift that they've gone through since the Seahawks used to be a team that everybody feared on defense. They're no longer that team. Quittin Dunbar is the big cornerback signing that they made in free agency, and he's going to be in jail, or at the very least suspended for quite a while after holding someone at gunpoint, if I'm not mistaken. So he's not going to be out there. They really didn't have cornerbacks last year, and that's why we started to see Russell Wilson throw the ball a little bit more. He threw the ball 516 times last year. I could see that going up above 550 with the defense, the shape that it's in. So if we see those numbers go up, Russell Wilson continually is extremely efficient. So if those targets are going somewhere, do you think they're going to go to Philip Dorsett? David Moore? No, we've already been there. We've done that. DK Moore was considered a raw prospect, and you saw his route tree grow as the year went on. They started moving him around the formation a little bit. If he gets 125 targets from Russell Wilson, he's finishing as a wide receiver 1.
Yeah, Davis, what are your thoughts there with DK Metcalf?
Couldn't agree more. It to me, it really is all about, how stubborn are the Seattle Seahawks going to be this year? Are they going to continue to allow, Chris Carson, DJ Dallas, Carlos Hyde? Are they going to allow those guys to determine what happens in games? Or are they going to turn the offense over and really let Russ cook? And obviously, we all want them to let Russ cook. And, I don't know. I am hoping that Tags is correct. Metcalf is a guy that I have been drafting, feel very confident drafting. Same with Lockett. I think the issue you might find with Metcalf is he obviously is not going to be a super high volume guy. And if he just runs bad on touchdowns, it could kind of be like a Mike Williams scenario where he looked great one year because he scores the 11 touchdowns. And then, bad luck kind of turns him into a guy that you're not feeling super excited about owning.
Yeah, there's a couple things. Obviously, there are concerns, and Davis mentioned them, but there's a couple things that are pointing in Metcalf's direction. Like, we're talking about, okay, Rashad Penny, most likely destined for the PUP list. We don't know what Chris Carson's health is. We just don't know if he's going to be healthy for week 1. At that point, you're relying on Carlos Hyde and DJ Dallas. DJ Dallas, a 4th-round running back out of Miami. So, and while I like Dallas, I don't think that they're going to be as efficient running the ball as they have been with Carson and Penny over the past couple of years. If that's the case, then you're looking at, and Davis phrased it as letting Russ cook. I love that. Letting them air the ball out a little bit more. And if that's the case, then there's more targets to go around because, again, you're talking about Philip Dorsett and David Moore behind him. Not exactly, top tier backup options. So then additionally, the other thing is that, and I mentioned this previously, DK Metcalf saw 17 targets inside the 20 last year in the red zone. He only brought in 5 of those receptions with a 29.41% catch rate. If he sees 17 targets in the red zone again, but his catch rate bounces up to 50% even, then you're talking about even more scoring opportunities for a very, very dynamic receiving threat. So DK Metcalf, certainly, I like him this year. I think he's a fine option, especially in where his ADP is right now. So yeah, I'm with you, Tags.
Yep. No, it's good to hear you guys, everybody on board with this one. It just makes too much sense. And, going forward, you have to project defense because otherwise you're never going to be able to project those pass attempts. It's like the same thing with the Vikings, right? Last year they threw the ball under 450 times. This year they're going to be, the defense is going to take a step back. They're I don't want to say they're rebuilding on defense, but they slowly are. So we could see them take a jump like the Seahawks did last year. And the Seahawks defense has not gotten better this offseason.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Davis, who do you have for your second guy here?
I have what is probably viewed as a very boring selection, which is going to be Robert Woods of the Los Angeles Rams. Basically 2 straight 1,000-yard seasons in this offense. They use him creatively as a rusher, literally even giving him goal line carries sometimes. And Brandon Cook's no longer on the team, a little bit more passing volume to go around. It seems like everyone prefers Cooper Kupp as the top Rams wide receiver drafted. I am team Robert Woods all the way. He did not lose any snaps when the Rams went into their more heavy 12 personnel stuff. Kupp was losing snaps to Josh Reynolds. Woods pretty much led the team in snaps every single week. So I think Woods is just one of those guys where if he ends up being your top wide receiver on your team, you're really not even all that upset about it, but he makes, one of the best second wide receivers in fantasy football this year.
I completely agree. I'm completely in your camp, Davis, there of Robert Woods. I have Robert Woods in my top 12 wide receivers because the opportunity is simply too good to pass up, and especially when you factor in his ADP and where he's going in drafts right now, you're getting him as your wide receiver 2, sometimes even your wide receiver 3, and if that's the case, then oh man, sign me up. So Tags, where are you at with Robert Woods? I know we've talked about this a little bit, but where are you at right now?
I like Robert Woods. I'm not as high as you guys are on him. I have him around that wide receiver 17, 18 range. I feel like he is a good wide receiver 2 to have. I feel like he's like the Jarvis Landry, right? In terms of maybe he is the new Jarvis Landry in fantasy football because nobody wants to draft him where he's finished, right? He only scored 2 touchdowns last year, yes, and people have talked about positive regression and all that, but the issue is that he's not a touchdown guy. He's never scored more than 6 touchdowns in a season, and he's obviously been under McVay here a couple of years. So I don't want to assume that goes north now. He might score some rushing touchdown or 2, which should help prop up those numbers. He's one of the safer wide receiver 2s that you can get. And can he finish as a top 12 wide receiver? Yeah, I'd say low end. He could probably finish there. But he's one of the safer wide receiver 2s. So I like Woods. It's not that I don't like him. I just think the ceiling's a bit limited.
Sure. I mean, from my perspective, even if he gets to 6 touchdowns, I'm fine with that, especially when you factor in last year's receiving. If he comes around there, yeah. Right? I mean, even in 2018 too, 2018 was 86 receptions for 1,219 yards. Last year was 90 receptions for 1,134 yards. So if he gets 90 receptions, 1,134 yards and 6 touchdowns, you're talking about a bona fide wide receiver 1.
Yeah.
So I really like him there. I'm glad that you brought him up, Davis, because I'm definitely in your camp there. All right, I'm going to bring up David Montgomery. Currently as the running back 24 in ECR and the running back 25 in ADP. I think, I've talked about him a lot on this podcast where I think everything that could have gone wrong for David Montgomery last year did. Now, am I sitting here and saying that David Montgomery is one of the most talented running backs in the NFL? He's going to average 4.5 yards per carry, and score 10 plus rushing touchdowns? No, I'm not sitting here saying that. But when we're looking at under the radar studs and these guys who are going to outperform their ADP, a lot of this happens on the back of just pure volume. And as we look at the Bears running back situation, you have Montgomery, you have Cohen, and then behind you have Ryan Nall, who Ryan Nall's not going to be a factor in the rushing game. Tariq Cohen's not seen more than 90, 100 carries. Just not happening. That's not who he is. He's more of a receiver. So at that point, David Montgomery's locked in for 250, 260, even 270 plus carries if this offense can get back to at least efficient. So, even if I'm projecting him with a 3.7, 3.9 yards per carry, under 4 yards per carry, he's still going to drastically outperform where you're getting him. I understand that he hurt a lot of rosters last year. I get it. He was insanely hyped up. People were selecting him in the 4th round, 3rd round of last year's drafts. And he hurt your rosters. I get it. Mm-hmm. But looking at this season, I believe he's in too great of an opportunity, especially when you factor in his draft stock. Davis, where are you at with David Montgomery? Are you kind of one of the guys that's just, I'll let someone else take him, or are you looking at him in those mid rounds?
So I think the problem you have with David Montgomery is he's actually more of a guy who benefits from an injury than a guy who should be considered a stone cold starter. Because if Tariq Cohen plays 16 games, David Montgomery's target floor is super limited, or target ceiling rather, and floor, actually both are. And also his touchdown upside is limited just because, the Bears offense isn't very good, whether it's led by Mitch Trubisky or whether it's led by Nick Foles. We expect it to basically be league average at best. So kind of what's going to end up happening is Montgomery might be a guy who at year's end, it's totally possible that he ends up being running back 19, but he's going to be a guy who's not featured on a ton of league championship winning teams because, grinding out 11 points a week is not super valuable. It's those ceiling weeks, it's those spiked weeks that are so valuable. And I'm not sure that David Montgomery really has all that many spiked weeks in him.
Sure. Tags, what are your thoughts there?
I think it depends on the offense, really, in terms of if Matt Nagy can get back on track and go back to the coach that he was in 2018, I absolutely think that there's potential for David Montgomery to finish as an RB1 this year. Not the RB1, but a RB1. And I say that because going back to 2018, we had Tariq Cohen finish as the RB13, Jordan Howard finishes the RB20. So both of them did fairly well, and it's not like Trubisky had an MVP caliber season. It just depends on how the offense works out. Now, Tariq Cohen has received targets. Those are not going to go away. But last year, based on his opportunity, I came out with an article. It went up on FantasyPros just yesterday. It said who should have scored the most fantasy points in 2019, and it's based on. And I've talked about this before, every single carry, every single target, every single pass attempt, depending on where it's at on the field, has a certain expected fantasy outcome. The stat that I want people to latch onto in this is that of the top 14 running backs and who should have scored the most, 13 of them were in the top 14 at year's end. That tells you that opportunity means absolutely everything to a running back, not so much talent. That's why we talk about why they're replaceable. David Montgomery was number 15 in opportunity last year, and that was with Tariq Cohen getting 104 targets. That was with Mike Davis getting a couple starts to start the year. So there was just so much opportunity for him. He had 88% of their carries inside the 5-yard line. I know, Davis, that they don't have a whole lot of those opportunities, but again, if Matt Nagy can get back on track as a play caller, and maybe Nick Foles does insert some energy into this offense, or at least some reliability, I do think that people are going to be very happy if they get David Montgomery as their flex player or even a low-end RB2.
For sure. All right. Hey, before we keep going, I need to make sure to mention that we are doing a giveaway. We are giving away a DeAndre Hopkins signed Cardinals helmet, courtesy of Pristine Auction. And guys, this thing looks amazing. It's easy to enter the giveaway. All you have to do is leave a review for the show on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, and send a screenshot of the review at contest@fantasypros.com. If you're looking for more details, simply head over to fantasypros.com/contest to find out more. This contest is coming to a close here soon, so make sure to enter before it's too late. All right, Tags, let's go to you for your third guy here in Undervalued Studs.
All right. So I think, by the way, when you mentioned David Montgomery, I think you could have mentioned Tariq Cohen in that same sentence just because of all the targets he gets and the opportunity that he has in that team. He's already shown that he could finish as a borderline RB1, but I don't consider him a stud, just more of like a reliable fantasy player. I am going to go down. I'm going to stick with the running back position. I'm going to go with Ronald Jones. Now, Yates, we've talked about this on the podcast before. I know you're a Keyshawn Vaughn guy, but I've stated continually that, going into the NFL draft, people talked about the Bucs potentially getting a running back, and people talked about Keyshawn Vaughn as a running back. And Yates, I know you were higher on him than most, but I don't know anybody who had him as like a surefire RB1 on a team where you would say, oh, he's going to walk in, he's going to be the starter. I think a lot of guys had him outside their top 5 running backs. So when you see him fall to the third rounders on average, they get like around 150 to 180 touches per season in their first year. And Bruce Arians has not been extremely giving to young running backs. So when you see the way that Ronald Jones finished the year, when you know that they've upgraded the offensive line, Tom Brady under center, Ronald Jones has been working on his passing game chops. And by the way, I think he was like 4th in the league last year in terms of yards per route run among running backs. So Ronald Jones is a better receiver than I think people think. So I'm a fan of Ronald Jones, and I think it's knowing that this offense is going to score points, I think it's very possible that Ronald Jones, if he hangs on to this job, he can finish as a top 10 running back in 2020.
Davis, what are your thoughts there? I'll come back and I'll kind of finish up the conversation with because Keyshawn Vaughn is on my list. So because I knew that Tags was going to bring up Ronald Jones. So Davis, I want to get your thoughts here on Ronald Jones and this Tampa Bay Buccaneers running back situation.
I am Jones over Keyshawn Vaughn in this backfield. Basically my thinking on that is I sort of expect that Ronald Jones is going to be the guy who, if there is a stud breakout in this backfield, if there is a guy who comes out and crushes in this backfield, it's going to be Ronald Jones. And if Vaughn wins the job, it's likely to be a timeshare. Probably Dare Ogunbowale will be playing some snaps in that scenario. Probably we are going to see, Ronald Jones get some of the goal line work and, Keyshawn Vaughn playing some of the third downs. Whereas if Jones wins the job, I think he can get, targets on the early downs. We saw last year in this Arians offense, I believe that there were over 50 early down running back targets. So first or second down, that's, one of the highest numbers in the league. So I am definitely team Ronald Jones, in terms of the Bucs backfield. I agree, with Tags here.
Yeah. Well, the point or the benefit in this conversation is that both of them, it's not like there's a huge disparity in ADP, is what I'm trying to say. That Ronald Jones and Keyshawn Vaughn are both in the RB 40s, I think, late RB 30s, 40s with running back ADP. So, it's not like Ronald Jones is priced all the way up at RB 20 or 15 or whatever, and Keyshawn Vaughn is down at RB 45. You're able to take your shot with either of these guys, and if it works out, great. Then you've potentially got a league winner, an undervalued stud, right? That's why we're talking about him here. So I think with Keyshawn Vaughn and Ronald Jones, it is a bit of projection on both sides, where Ronald Jones, the last time that we saw him from a pass blocking perspective, guys, he didn't grade out great in PFF's metrics, right? I don't have the exact ranking up in front of me, but it wasn't great. And then as far as a receiver, we've seen him steadily improve, sure, but coming into the NFL, that was not his strong suit by any means. So you have to look at Ronald Jones and you have to project a little bit forward and say that, okay, in the offseason, he's taken huge steps forward in these two areas, because with guys like Bruce Arians and Tom Brady now, we also have to factor in Tom Brady into the conversation, that pass blocking is incredibly important. And if he is not up to snuff with what he can do as a pass blocker, then he's going to be riding the bench. That's just what we saw last season even. So then with Keyshawn Vaughn, he was someone who impressed me with pass catching and pass protection. It's really where I'm kind of coming off of, where I'm basing my projection for Keyshawn Vaughn off of, that I think he's going to get onto the field. So all that to say, it's really a dart throw with either of these guys, but if one of them just flat out wins the job, then they're going to be of huge, huge value for fantasy football. Right now, it's just a question of which one that is. Tags, do you think the limited preseason, right now, 2 games are, just completely wiped out? We're only down to 2 preseason games right now. The NFLPA is saying that they don't want to play any. They just want to go right into the regular season.
Right.
Does this play a factor in potentially all rookie running backs?
I think it plays I think it's against a lot of rookies. It's not even just running backs, the quarterbacks. We talked about Tua Tagovailoa, that he might not start the season because Ryan Fitzpatrick obviously knows the offense, or well, I don't want to say he does know the offense, working with Chan Gailey because he's been everywhere. But I think this is going to hurt a lot of rookies, including running backs, especially ones that are taken in the third round. There's no way for Keyshawn Vaughn to show that he deserves that role over Ronald Jones, who has been playing in the Bruce Arians offense, for a full season now. He showed up at the end of the year. And again, I know that Bruce Arians didn't want to trust him. It was almost like going back and forth between those two. But he did it again. He did the same thing with David Johnson as a rookie, where he didn't want to trust David Johnson. Then finally, he just exploded. So it's possible that Ronald Jones turns into that guy. Keyshawn Vaughn is a dart throw as well. And again, I'm not going to pretend that Ronald Jones, I'm saying he's going to hold on to the job the entire year, but that's a valuable role to have. If you can get that job and get 15 touches per week in that Tampa Bay offense, it's worth a lot of fantasy points.
Absolutely. I agree. All right. Well, Davis, let's go to you and let's move through these a little bit quicker. We still have quite a few names to get through. So, Davis, who do you have for your third guy here?
I have Hunter Henry as mine. Basically a guy who, not that long ago, we were talking about, ascending the tight end throne, turning into the next Jimmy Graham, Rob Gronkowski style guy. And, really would not be particularly surprising to me if he, beats Zach Ertz this year, finishes as the tight end 4 or something like that, especially if Herbert is a little bit better than we all think. Pretty much just a guy who's really been stalled out by injuries, but he's getting drafted after Hayden Hurst, getting drafted after Tyler Higbee, Evan Ingram. All of these guys have massive question marks of one degree or another. So I am with Hunter Henry here.
Tags, what are your thoughts there on Hunter Henry?
I don't like this offense, and I'm okay missing on them. I don't even know who the quarterback's going to be right now. Again, it's probably going to be Tyrod Taylor just because Herbert hasn't had a chance to even play in a preseason game. We don't know if he's going to be able to, so I'm guessing it's Tyrod, and Tyrod's never thrown the ball more than 432 times in a season. So if you start breaking that down and you say, well, Mike Williams is going to get some targets, and Keenan Allen's obviously going to get some targets, Austin Eckler needs to be focused. So it's like you start going through this and saying Tyrod Taylor's not a guy that's going to throw 30 touchdowns. So it's almost just... It's one of those offenses I'm okay being wrong on if I'm wrong on, but I just don't see the volume being there for the passing game options, including someone like Keenan Allen, who is rightfully a stud football player. He's a stud route runner, but I don't even have him in my top 25 wide receivers this year because I am so concerned about that offense overall.
I'm completely with you as far as, I'm okay missing on this offense, especially when you factor in Hunter Henry's ADP right now. It's still kind of up there, and there are some other guys behind him that I do like. That I'd be willing, I don't think have as many question marks. But if we're talking about just from a pure talent perspective and what he can do when he's on the field, I think Hunter Henry absolutely belongs in the conversation. I think he's one of the more talented tight ends in the NFL. So, Davis, is this where you're talking about him and you're bringing him up as in the conversation of an undervalued stud? Are you projecting him to be that tight end 4, or are you saying that it's in the realm of possibilities?
I'm saying that, when we're looking at tight ends with theoretical ceilings, for example, I think the Chargers offense is still probably going to be better than the Dolphins. I think there are enough questions about Ingram and Higbee that Henry is a guy that when he falls to me in the 8th, 9th round, when you're getting a discount from him, he's just going to be a guy that I own in a ton of these best ball drafts, basically.
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes sense. If he's fallen farther than what you have to pay up for him, then absolutely that makes sense. Pulling the trigger. All right, I'm gonna go with Tyler Boyd here, guys. Tyler Boyd is ADP wide receiver 33 right now, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. As we're looking at what he's done over the past couple seasons in a very anemic offense. Looking at, he's put up incredible production. He's been extremely reliable for fantasy football. He really emerged last season. And then you factor in now that you have Joe Burrow throwing him the ball, you have a very dynamic receiving core around him. And I think that is potentially what is scaring a lot of people off from taking Tyler Boyd in, the wide receiver 20s, in the 20s there at the position. Where you're looking at AJ Green coming back, T. Higgins now added into the fold, John Ross. They don't really have much competition at tight end position for targets, so that's working in their favor. But Joe Mixon out of the backfield, Giovanni Bernard. Of course, it's a stacked receiving core, but Tyler Boyd is one of the better wide receivers in this league, and I think that he is going to get his targets in this offense. I currently have him at wide receiver 26, and I think that a top 20 finish is not out of the realm of possibilities. So if you're getting him at a discount there, wide receiver 33, I think he's someone you should be looking at in your drafts. Davis, what do you think there with Tyler Boyd? Is he someone that you're targeting?
I am in on Boyd. I think overall, just the idea of targeting the Cincinnati Bengals, if you believe that Joe Burrow kind of has, that ability to, that tide that lifts all ships, which I think is certainly in the range of outcomes. I really like targeting AJ Green and Tyler Boyd. So I am in on that one. I love in these, I wish obviously we had the best ball championship, but in some of these best ball drafts, I really like taking Boyd when I plan on taking Burrow as my second quarterback.
Yeah.
Sure. Tags, where are you at with Boyd?
I was going to say, I think we can all agree. It's like we talk about, can AJ Green stay healthy? And if he doesn't, then we have Boyd is going to establish himself as a top 15 receiver. Then we have T. Higgins that people are thinking is going to overtake John Ross. And Joe Mixon's going to take a big step forward. All these things, all add up to Joe Burrow having a massive season. That's basically what it comes down to. So I was actually going to bring up AJ Green today because, again, he's a guy that over the course of his career has just been a consistent stud. And he's done that with, let's just say, lackluster quarterback play. He's done it with a quarterback that basically he doesn't have a starting job anymore. So it just goes to show what the league thinks of Andy Dalton and the throws he was making, whereas someone like AJ Green and Tyler Boyd may have made him look a little bit better. And that's the same thing, going with John Ross, a guy that was wide open down the field countless times, and Dalton just missed him. So I'm excited about this entire Bengals offense. I think that you're going to find there might be 2 weekly fantasy relevant fantasy wide receivers in this team every single week.
I agree. All right. Well, who are we up to now? It is Tags, right?
Yeah. All right. So I will bring up DJ Chark. Chark flashed last year, man. And I know that he came onto the scene and didn't really, nobody expected it. And it was like week 1 happened. And you're like, okay, let's see it some more. And we saw it some more and we saw it some more. And then there was a touchdown that he had against Chris Harris Jr. that was called back due to a penalty that was kind of crappy. And it was like, okay, this guy can score on Chris Harris Jr., a guy that was playing lights out at the beginning of the year, legit shutting down everyone. Nothing has changed for me outside the fact that this defense has gotten a hell of a lot worse. Gardner Minshew is entrenched as the starter, and obviously we know Gardner Minshew was supporting DJ Chark as a fantasy relevant wide receiver in his time taking over. They added Laviska Shenault, but Shenault had core surgery this offseason. He's a rookie who's not going to have time in preseason. Chris Conley is not someone I'm really worried about. D.D. Westbrook's playing the same role. Leonard Fournette's he's there. DJ Chark is a guy that can finish as a wide receiver 1. I'm not going to bank on it because, again, I don't think this offense is good enough to support a wide receiver 1. But DJ Chark he's kind of a hidden gem in the wide receiver 3 range. Like him and DK Metcalf are the 2 guys. Metcalf has the higher ceiling because of who his quarterback is, but Chark could see 130, 140 targets and finish, as a top 15 wide receiver easy.
I agree. I think that, if we're looking for a player who can emerge, he's done it and he's shown incredible chemistry with Gardner Minshew. So, Davis, what are your thoughts here with DJ Chark?
I actually disagree with Tags that he can't have a wide receiver 1 season because I think that there's a chance that DJ Chark legitimately scores 50% of the Jaguars' passing touchdowns. He is so much more dominant in that area of the field than everyone else. I guess actually sneakily the addition of Tyler Eifert might impact his red zone targets. But I basically think that DJ Chark is as good as DJ Moore. Is good. I think he is in that same realm of guy that we should project to be the next wave of great wide receivers in the NFL.
Tags, looking at DJ Chark in this range of kind of ADP, who are some of the guys that you'd be willing to pull the trigger over, right? If we're talking about, okay, let's back up your claim here and just kind of put it to the test. So DJ Chark is on the board, but you've also got these other 2 guys that are ahead of him kind of in ECR, ADP. Who would you be willing to take him over?
Yeah, I would take him over Keenan Allen 100%. I'd take him over Stephon Diggs. I'd take him over Cortland Sutton. Those are guys in that range that I believe that he should be taken over.
Okay. Cool. All right, Davis, who do you have here for your 4th guy?
My next guy is it's not a straight up stud, but it's Tony Pollard in the sense of he is the best 0 running back target in fantasy football. If Ezekiel Elliott gets injured, he okay, I'll this thought experiment right now. Ezekiel Elliott gets suspended for 16 games, and we know that Tony Pollard, just so Ezekiel Elliott cannot play in 2020, where does he go in drafts tags?
I mean, if he can't play, he's going to go as a first-round pick. He would go in that Mixon range, probably.
Yeah, exactly. So, but with even more pass-catching upside than Mixon, probably. So, I think that pretty much just tells the story right there. Like, he is the best zero running back target in football. He has no competition in their backfield behind Zeke. Their other running backs are Jordan Chunn and Rico Dowdle, both of whom are undrafted free agents. And I don't even know if those guys will make the team. They'll probably have Jameez Olawale as their fullback / third running back. So
I think it's possible that Pollard might have some value even without a Zeke injury. And I'm saying that because, like, if you go back to Mike McCarthy, and I know that they didn't change coordinators, so this could be all for naught, but Pollard actually had some explosive plays last year, didn't score as much as he probably should have on the plays that he did have, and not because of him. He actually played really well. But back in Mike McCarthy, even when Eddie Lacy was there, he was using James Starks and stuff like that. And it's not to say Ezekiel Elliott's Eddie Lacy. I mean, maybe he's heading down that path after seeing him through this quarantine. But I do believe that Mike McCarthy wants to take some load off Zeke, because even Zeke, by his own account, was not as efficient as he typically was last year. So I think it would benefit the team to actually involve Tony Pollard a little bit more.
Yeah, I've talked about it previously here, where this year more than ever, in the middle rounds, I am more willing to take shots on league winners. That, these guys that are in the conversation of they have standalone potential value, they might just be on the edge, right? But if the starter goes down in front of them, they're league winners, especially when you factor in uncertainties with, potential injuries this season, with no, extended preseason, to then, what happens if a player contracts COVID-19 and they have to go into quarantine. So guys that fall into this conversation are Alexander Mattison, Kareem Hunt, J.K. Dobbins, and Tony Pollard. Yeah. Like, those are the four guys off the top of my head that I can look at and say that if the starter ahead of them goes down, their role is going to drastically change. And like you mentioned, Davis, what happened? Where would we be drafting Tony Pollard if Zeke wasn't in the equation? Well, yeah, he'd be in the first round, early second round conversation completely. Same with J.K. Dobbins, same with Kareem Hunt. So these guys, instead of pulling the trigger on a James White, who, if Sony Michel goes down, James White isn't going to get 200 plus carries, that he wasn't going to get previously. His role is going to stay the same. Now, he can be a safe option, but he's not going to be a league winner. So Tony Pollard absolutely falls into that conversation of a guy that I would be willing to take. And his ADP is way down there, where, you're taking Kareem Hunt in the 7th, J.K. Dobbins in the 8th, Tony Pollard's in the 11th or 12th round, guys. So he's absolutely someone who I like, and I'm glad that you brought him up, Davis.
Literally as we were discussing him, I went on the clock in the 11th round in the Scott Fish Bowl, and I took Tony Pollard.
There you go.
Yep.
I was debating him or Matt Breida, and I was like, you guys are right. I mean, what's really the upside with Breida? I mean, even when he gets the workhorse role, he can't stay healthy. I'll go Pollard. Also,
how the heck are some leagues drafts in like the 18th round? Like, they're on someone
it, man.
I saw was in the 18th round. Yours is in the 11th. Mine's in like the 7th. I don't get it.
There's some in like the 4th, dude.
I know. All right. Well, I'm going to mention J.K. Dobbins just on the back of what I brought up as my fourth guy here. J.K. Dobbins, if Mark Ingram goes down, he is absolutely in the conversation to finish as the number 1 overall running back based on this offense just alone. We saw what Mark Ingram can do. I think J.K. Dobbins is more talented than Mark Ingram. He's someone who I absolutely loved coming out in this draft class. So if Dobbins gets the majority of the work there, now we would see Justice Hill, his workload increase, of course. We would see Gus Edwards, his workload increase, but not to the point where I think it's going to be the split right now with Ingram and Dobbins. So if something happens to Ingram, man, we are talking about Dobbins being a absolute league winner. Davis, what do you think about that? We didn't get to hear your thoughts there as I ranted just a few minutes ago, but where are your thoughts on Dobbins and that concept of, taking these guys that are league winners?
I just took him at 704 in the Scott Fish Bowl as my first running back. Now, okay. I'm not thrilled about it.
First running back.
I think Dobbins, he's kind of got this weird upside where his absolute ceiling is going to be, let's say, 25 catches, and that might be pushing it a little bit. but he could also score 15 touchdowns, even splitting the backfield with Mark Ingram, because this offense is going to run so much. And, they have all that cool pistol and read option stuff that they can do near the goal line. And, if Lamar Jackson scores 3 rushing touchdowns this year, that means, one of Dobbins or Ingram is going to be having an amazing rushing season. So I completely agree with you that Dobbins does have league winning upside. He's not a guy I view as I'm not going into drafts being like, okay, I'm going to take Dobbins as my first or second running back, but oftentimes, I prefer him to DeAndre Swift, and a lot of times Swift goes ahead of him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Tags, what are your thoughts around Dobbins really quick?
I am a little against you on this one, Yates, and it's because even if Mark Ingram got hurt, or even if they chose to go Dobbins over Ingram, this is going to be a timeshared backfield. Even with Ingram, how well he was playing last year, they still gave Gus Edwards 133 carries. Justice Hill's still on the roster. They don't throw the ball a whole lot, as Davis was talking about, and that's obviously where when you look for breakout running backs, you're going to need them to get those 50 plus targets. And I attack running backs in high scoring situations, and this is obviously one of them, but the real problem here is that there's going to be some touchdown regression for these running backs this year, because Lamar Jackson, based on what he did last year, he shouldn't have scored the 5 rushing touchdowns he did. He should have had 12. And do I think that can come back? I think it's possible that Lamar Jackson scores 14 rushing touchdowns, and I'm not exaggerating by any means. I'm really not. So
totally.
If that happens, then you're going to start losing some of those touchdowns to the running backs. Dobbins, I think he's an interesting guy to take a shot on late in drafts, because I think there's a possibility he does overtake Mark Ingram. Ingram's 31 years old now. They felt like Dobbins was a first-round talent. That's what they said, and that's why they said they would have been doing themselves a disservice if they passed on him in the second round, which tells you they're extremely high on him. And running backs, you want to use them throughout their rookie deals. So I don't mind this one at all. I do not think he has top 5 upside, though.
Sure. Okay. Let's go 2 more each, guys. So Tags, you're up here. Let's pick out your best 2 here. Let's go. Obviously, we'll go once around for each, but
yeah.
Let's hear your next guy.
All right. So I brought this up in the chat with Yates earlier. So I was debating between TJ Hawkinson and Jonnu Smith. And I really happen to think that Hawkinson there's something here. And I say this because that expected fantasy points, that piece that I did, the only positions that were extremely reliant upon volume were tight end and running back. Wide receiver was all over the place, where it doesn't necessarily, opportunity doesn't always equal fantasy points for wide receivers. For tight ends and running backs, it really, really, really does. And Hawkinson, he missed the last quarter of the season, but before that, he was a guy that was 10th among tight ends in actual opportunity, which means he should have finished as a top 12 tight end. He was extremely inefficient last year, and I think people have kind of lost track of the fact that tight ends typically take a year or two to even get into any sort of rhythm. Evan Ingram is the only, ever since I started tracking fantasy in my stats, Evan Ingram, well, after Rob Gronkowski, that is, but basically since 2008, I think, that the only rookie tight end to finish top 12 was Evan Ingram, and that was because there were so many injuries in the team. He saw tons of targets. Hawkinson's walking into an offense, they don't really have a whole lot of wide. They have Galladay, they have Marvin Jones, and then it's okay, Danny Amendola, really? There's really not any depth behind those guys either. I like Quintez Cephas, but he's a rookie. So I like TJ Hawkinson an awful lot, and I think that if you're going the late tight end approach, I'm going to throw my guy Hayden Hurst in here. I would have talked about him had I not talked about him on every podcast that we have, but Hayden Hurst, TJ Hawkinson, if I'm waiting at tight end, those are the guys I'm going with. Hayden Hurst is my 1A. And then if there's a 1B, I think I'm going to go with TJ Hawkinson.
Excuse me. Davis, what are your thoughts there with Hawkinson? Obviously, last year, he did not do much. Obviously, he had his first, I think it was the first game of the season against Arizona.
First game of his career was ridiculous, and then he sucked.
Right, where a lot of his production came from, and then just kind of fell off a cliff. 32 receptions last year on 59 targets, 367 yards, and only 2 touchdowns. Do you think he's in line for a huge bounce back? Or I guess you can't really call it a bounce back to expectation, I guess. But what are your thoughts here on Hawkinson for this season?
Yeah, I think that Hawkinson, Gesicki, and Fant are kind of all that trio of young guys with upside who could see themselves having an outsized role relative to what most tight ends at their age end up doing, because they all produced at a young age. They all have plus athleticism. So, I am drafting loads of TJ Hawkinson this year.
Nice.
Awesome. Yeah, I think Hawkinson is around like tight end 15, tight end 14 for me. So he's like in this range with a bunch of other guys. Like just, we've talked about it, tags. Like just throw all these guys into a blender and whichever one comes out, I have no idea. You know, I have no idea which one's it going to be. So you're kind of just taking a dart throw. And I think with his ADP, if you're going to really just throw the dart late in drafts, you know, Hawkinson's a fine option because he's got the athleticism. He's got the talent. I'm not disputing that.
The Lions are going to be terrible on defense, as always. They just traded away Darius Slay. Whenever Slay's out of the lineup, that's a team that you legitimately have targeted like relentlessly in DFS.
Yeah, and I mean, I really like Okudah, who they brought in early in the draft. Obviously, you know, I really, really like him. But as far as him making an immediate impact to the point of what Darius Slay was doing from a coverage standpoint, I don't think so. You know, Desmond Trufant, obviously he was cut from the Falcons for a reason. So I think the Lions defense is they just kind of shuffled the chairs around the deck, if that makes sense. I don't think that they really improved much. So, yeah, they could be a team that is throwing the ball a ton if Matthew Stafford can stay healthy again. Stafford was great last year up until his injury, so he can definitely support multiple options. So, I get it. All right, Davis, who do you have here for your fifth guy?
My fifth guy is going to be, I think, a super overlooked dude, which is Michael Gallup, wide receiver 31. You know, this range we love, but Michael Gallup, to me, I have him over AJ Green and Tyler Boyd. I have him over Diggs. I have him over, Keenan Allen, who we just talked about, kind of agreeing with Tags's supposition that maybe the volume is not going to be as great there in Los Angeles. And the reason for it is he actually had more targets or was actually, I got to pull it up right now so I don't misspeak, but had a very similar amount of targets to Amari Cooper last year while, not playing in every single game. He missed a couple games with injury. He was really efficient, and I basically expect Dallas to again be, the best offense in football. Last year, they gained the most yards per play in the NFL. I expect that they will probably do that again this year, replacing Tavon Austin, Randall Cobb, and Jason Witten targets with CeeDee Lamb and Blake Jarwin targets. And so the stat, by the way, is more targets per game than Amari Cooper. Cooper had 6 more, but Gallup played in fewer games. So Gallup is 14. To me, he's kind of a guy where I'm probably taking him in literally almost every draft that I do.
Tags, obviously, we like Gallup, and I think he was someone who was just skyrocketing up, ECR moving into the NFL draft. And then the Cowboys obviously go out and draft CeeDee Lamb, who a lot of people had as their wide receiver 1 on their personal draft boards. So, added to this offense, does that scare you off of Gallup this season? Where are you at right now?
I really thought I was going to be scared off Gallup. Right after the draft, I kind of went and redid rankings and things like that, and I dropped him out of the top 40 wide receivers, and I was like, it feels bad because obviously he's proven he can finish as a top 24 player. I liked him coming out of college. I really did. He was someone that I loved as a day 2 target, and I went and did projections and realized it's not as bad as I thought for Gallup. Because Randall Cobb did receive plenty of targets. And it's like, even if you were to say, hey, we're going to give CeeDee Lamb the exact same amount of targets that we gave Randall Cobb, that's plenty for a rookie wide receiver. It's really plenty. And I wouldn't be shocked if CeeDee Lamb, has a harder time transitioning because CeeDee Lamb is coming from some terrible college competition. That's why it's like Jerry Jeudy was my number 1 wide receiver. Michael Gallup has proven he can get it done in the league, and he's like the field stretcher in this team. A guy that can, his high yards per reception. Dak's not afraid to take the shot down the field. They have weapons everywhere, so it's almost like you can't tilt coverage his way. I like Gallup a lot, and when I did projections, he came in much better, and I'm like, okay, he's a wide receiver 3. Do I think that he has wide receiver 1 upside? I don't know. I mean, if Amari's healthy, and
Amari would have to get hurt for that to happen, I think.
Yeah, for sure. But he's still a good player, and I think that people, myself included, over-exaggerated his demise when they drafted CeeDee Lamb.
That is crazy that you brought that up, Davis. That is something that I hadn't realized. Amari Cooper had 119 targets last year in 16 games. Yep. Gallup had 113 in only 14 games. If they had both played 16, Gallup would have out-targeted Amari Cooper.
Amari, it should be noted that Amari was playing hurt through the second half of the season, so I think they cut back a little bit in his targets. Okay. But at the same time, Amari's never been a guy that has seen 140. If Amari were to get 140, 150 targets, people would talk about him as one of the best players in the league. I'm confident in that.
And that's crazy. Amari still finishes the wide receiver 9 last year on that target total. Okay, I'm going to bring up... Who am I going to bring up? I'm going to bring up Michael Pittman Jr., guys. ADP wide receiver 62 and ECR wide receiver 63. So, guys, if there's someone who we want to look at, and we can look at the rookie wide receivers and we say, who could be the A.J. Brown of this year? I think it's Michael Pittman Jr., where A.J. Brown wasn't being drafted last year. Neither was Terry McLaurin. And at least within the top 15 rounds, I was looking at this earlier today for an article I'm writing. And so A.J. Brown finished as the wide receiver 15. He came out of nowhere and just shocked us all. Obviously, once Tannehill took over, he was incredible. So I think if we're looking for a guy who can be that super late option, you've taken him in the 12th, 13th round in your redraft leagues, and you want a guy who can finish in the 20s, I think it's very, very reasonable that we could be talking at this time next year and looking back and saying, why didn't we draft Michael Pittman Jr. a lot higher than what we did? Davis, what are your thoughts here with Michael Pittman Jr.? Are you more on my side? Are you more in line with ECR? Where are you at?
So I think there are a couple primary concerns I have here with Pittman. So the first is Phillip Rivers, to me, looks like a guy who just is not good anymore, and it's going to be hard for him to support Jonathan Taylor and the tight ends and T.Y. Hilton and Michael Pittman, and, maybe Paris Campbell plays more this year. So I think those are pretty legitimate concerns. And then also Paris Campbell, they spent a high pick on him. He was injured last year, but really wouldn't surprise me if they try and make a concerted effort to get Paris Campbell on the field and to target him to figure out what they have in him. So Pittman, might be 4th or 5th in line for targets for them. I totally see your path. He's just not a guy that I am jamming into my lineups.
Sure. Tags, where are you at?
I like him now. I'm not going to rank him extremely high, but he's one of those guys that I would probably draft over some guys that I have in front of him that might project a little bit better. And the reason I say that is because Pittman can be the Vincent Jackson for Phillip Rivers, the Mike Williams type receiver, and we know that those targets are valuable. Phillip Rivers, is he done? I mean, I guess that remains to be seen, but at the same time, targets have to go somewhere in this offense, and the reason I like drafting Pittman with one of your final picks is because you're going to find out in week 1. Like, you don't have to wait and find out if Pittman's the guy, because people cut A.J. Brown last year because he wasn't playing, and rightfully so. There was no way to understand what he was going to do as the year went on. But Michael Pittman, you're going to find out week 1 if he is that X receiver that they're talking about, because if he's on the field in 2 wide receiver sets, he should absolutely be considered as a top 50 fantasy wide receiver moving forward, and with upside for more. He has the upside to lead that team in touchdowns.
Yeah, completely. That's really the argument, and then basing that also off the fact that T.Y. Hilton hasn't played a full season since 2017.
He's 31, 31 now.
At his age too, it's a real concern. Yep. So if Hilton misses time, then you're talking about even more targets going Pittman's way. So I think that he is in line for a huge opportunity. I really do not understand why he's all the way down in the 60s in ADP and ECR. I've got him at wide receiver 28, guys. So I think that, and I think that he has a path to finish even higher than that. So, all right, let's go one more time around and let's kind of make these. Let's just do a lightning round with these guys. Tags, who do you got up first?
James Conner. If he stays healthy, he's going to be an RB1. It's pretty cut and dry. I understand injuries are you have to factor those in, and that's why he's falling in drafts. But he should go ahead of guys like David Johnson, Melvin Gordon. James Conner.
Yeah, it's all health-based, but I totally get the argument. All right, Davis, who do you have?
Just want to say I totally agree with Tags, and then Daniel Jones is going to be my guy. He's going to be classic bad actual real-life NFL quarterback, but he runs, he hucks the ball deep, and, he makes it happen.
It's one of the most talented wide receiver corps in football. I mean, yeah.
It's one of the deepest, I think, as far as you're looking at Saquon, Golden Tate, Sterling Shepard, Darius Slayton, Evan Ingram. That's a very, very talented.
Corey Coleman's still on the roster, buddy.
Do you really want to bring up Corey Coleman?
I kind of did.
In that what?
I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. No, I think he's got the opportunity, absolutely, to be a value this year. Tags mention him, but I'm going to bring him up too, just to drive that point home. It's Hayden Hurst for me. I think Hayden Hurst is tight end 12 in ECR, tight end 13 in ADP. Guys, he's going to finish well above that. And I think that he is a player that we should be targeting everywhere because his ADP is still super low. You're getting him super late. So I would personally, right now, I would rather wait on tight end rather than taking Mark Andrews in the 3rd or 4th round, Zach Ertz in that range too. I'd personally much, much rather wait and grab someone like Hayden Hurst in the later rounds. I think that that's a smarter way to just go about that tight end position. All right, Tags, any closing remarks here before we get out of here?
No, this is a fun show. I mean, we got to talk about some players that we haven't talked about in a little bit, and we're going to be working our way through, everybody. We want to touch on as many topics as we can leading up to this potentially preseasonless NFL season. But either way, we're excited, and thank you guys for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks. That's going to wrap up the episode today. Davis, thanks for joining us today, man. We really appreciate it.
Beautiful. Thanks for having me on, fellas.
Yeah, again, you can find him on Twitter at Davis Mattek. Tags and I can be found on Twitter at Kyle Y NFL and at Mike Tagliere NFL. And don't forget that we're on Instagram as well at Kyle Y NFL and at Mike Tagliere. Thank you all for listening to the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. From Mike Tagliere and Davis Mattek, I'm Kyle Yates, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Make sure to check out our featured videos as well. Also, make sure to click that red subscribe button to get notified when we post videos in the future.